This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
As I've stated so many times, probably for me, the best part of being a podcast host is that I really get to delve into some of the more interesting or, kind of sometimes spectacular or incredible, or even normal and ordinary human beings, and really spotlight like their amazing nature, like what it is that has them tick, what it is that turns them on, what it is that makes their life sing, what it is that matters to them. And today I am honored and privileged to have another one of those episodes set up. And now this is with a friend that, we haven't really spoken that much to each other. We know each other from Metal International, where we are both participants, I guess, or what do you call us? Members of that program. So Ben Cooke is with us today. And Ben is just, it's funny. Ben sort of returned to this WhatsApp thread that we were all having on Metal, and he just got this like ovation from 20 or 30 people. Welcome back. He's the best. If you don't know him, you should. All this other stuff. And I was like, we all got to get to know Ben. So I'm going to invite him on my podcast. So within a few minutes, I had Ben in another WhatsApp thread, invited him to the podcast. He gracefully and gratefully said yes. And now here we are introducing Ben Cooke to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. So what a wonderful honor it is to have you here, Ben. Thanks for joining us on Welcome to Humanity.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Fred.
It's a pleasure. Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative 8 today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation. It's a deep pleasure. So, Ben, we talked a little bit about how this conversation could go. It never really goes the way we plan it. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start off with this open-ended question that I ask some of our guests, and it sort of gets us started in a direction that then we get to explore what's on the edges. And that question is, Ben Cooke, who are you?
Wow, we're just going straight for the jugular, I guess.
Right,
huh?
Just basic question. Yeah, that's right. Who are you?
Who are you in the universe?
Not so much that you can answer it any way you want. You don't have to go out there in the cosmos. You can manage this any way you want.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I guess where to start? Professionally, I'm a media relations professional.
What does that mean?
Maybe you're familiar with the term publicist, or your listeners
Sure.
are. Essentially, I am a liaison between organizations, experts, other types of entities with the press, with the media. And we're talking about everything from newspapers to daytime talk shows, to radio programs, to podcasts like yours, Dr. Fred. And I work with them to sort of get them involved in that type of experience so they can get their message out, right? So I've been doing it for nearly 20 years. worked with some really amazing organizations and clients and so forth. And it's an interesting experience because it allows me, a curious person, as yourself, is I believe a self confessed curious person,
Mm-hmm.
to really get in and understand a whole wide variety of companies and people who are doing interesting things. And it has to be newsworthy in a lot of cases. So,
Mm-hmm.
or we find ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, who hires you? Is it just like, is it big companies, small companies, individuals who want to get known, individuals who don't want to get known? Who is it? Who is it that actually seeks out Ben Cooke?
Well, on the don't want to be known part, I would consider that to be more of a crisis management skill, which I wouldn't consider myself to be an expert in. I've certainly gone there. Sort of damage control if a story's going out of
Mm-hmm.
control for a person or an organization. What can we do to right the ship, so to speak?
Yes.
But my clients have ranged from modest startup companies looking to get the word out about what they're trying to do to organizations like NASA.
Mm-hmm.
Been a client of mine. Authors. I've worked with a lot of people in the medical field, doctors, experts who I would consider to be, experts can be anyone who understands financial markets, or they
Mm-hmm.
understand how your heart works or your
Mm-hmm.
brain works,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Mm-hmm.
have an interesting message to share to an audience. And we get them out there talking about it, sharing that, getting interviews done, whether it's Forbes.com or it's Good Morning America or what have you.
Mm-hmm. That's really wonderful, and I wonder. There's some things about this. It would seem to me that an attractive client for someone like doing what you do would be someone who has an interesting, a compelling, a unique message, something they're doing that actually has them naturally standing out from the crowd, but not yet exposed as such. Is that what you're talking about?
Sometimes, yeah. So if it's like if a new company is launching that's doing something novel or unique in a way, I will work with them to get that story out there, to get journalists talking about it, get them talking about it on news programs. There has to be this sort of newsworthiness to it, and sometimes I'll work with people where we kind of have to get creative on how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are, if you're in a business of any kind, you already have an audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's about finding the overlap in audiences between a type of media and what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're launching a new company that's involved in the music industry, right? Your audience is going to overlap with people who are writing about the music industry.
Mm-hmm.
If you are an interesting new startup and getting investment and so forth, that's going to be more interesting to business media, the
Mm-hmm.
CNBCs of the world, or
Mm-hmm.
organizations like TechCrunch, etc. If you are organizing people's houses, that might be something for daytime television.
Interesting. So it's really, in a lot of ways, it's part of your super skill set might be as a matchmaker, like making sure that the people I'm going to be rubbing elbows up with, or the people who are be best served to find my target audience as a possible publicist seeking entity, that you would put those in front of me. You would put those next to me so that proper information is disseminated in proper directions. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say I often liken it to um, being a storyteller or a producer of storytelling. So my clients have a story to tell. It's my job to help them shape and craft that story, and then we go out and we find somebody to share that story or distribute that story with us.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be media news organizations, et cetera, that are targeted at those different types of directions, right? So, one of my core clients right now is a very exciting company called Hyperloop Transportation Technologies.
Yes, fascinating.
I'm actually their head of media relations. I've been with them since 2014. And we've basically gone around the world in terms of news coverage, and virtually every country has written about us in some capacity.
Wow.
And, it just depends on the type of news. So like if we're partnering with a construction company, that's going to be maybe not as exciting for a lot of places, but there's going to be a lot of people in the industry of construction and business who would be interested in hearing about that or reporting about it.
Mm-hmm.
Versus the future of transportation, right? So, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. Maybe, are you familiar, Dr. Fred, with Hyperloop as a technology?
I only became somewhat more familiar with it on one Saturday morning in Metal, and I probably need to be refreshed a little bit, and maybe my listeners as well, just as maybe a thumbnail overview of what the whole story is.
I'll give you the pitch that I give the journalists.
Sounds good.
So, when we're talking about Hyperloop, we're talking about high-speed travel, and if you could imagine a train car, we take this train car. It fits 30 to 40 people. We take that train car with those people and we stick it inside of a tube. We remove a significant portion of the air within that tube to reduce the resistance. And then we elevate that.
Sounds like we're going to high speed here in a moment if you have to do that. So,
yeah. And then we elevate this train car with passive magnetic levitation.
Uh-oh. Wow.
And all of those things combined allow us to travel at speeds up to 760 miles per hour with very little energy.
And 760, as I recall, is the speed of sound. Was that somehow what matters at that point? Mach 1? Is that what that is?
Just below it. So we're approaching the sound barrier at that speed.
Mm-hmm. And so this has already been done, right? This is already being done in some spaces?
There are test tracks around the world, right? So Hyperloop Transportation Technologies has a commercial-sized full-scale test track in Toulouse, France.
Mm-hmm.
Toulouse is also known as Aerospace Valley in Europe. It's the headquarters of Airbus, which is the world's largest airplane manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
And we are performing full-scale testing there. There's some commercial options around the world that we're looking at as well. Sort of two, there's a handful of companies around the world. We're one of sort of the two leading companies. We're very involved in a project in the Midwest called the Great Lakes Hyperloop, which looked at connecting Chicago, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh.
What about Detroit?
We love Detroit, but we're talking with other cities throughout that region to sort of join up there.
I'm a Detroiter. That's why that comes from.
Great. Maybe you can help us out because we are talking with sort of the neighboring major cities, of course, mm-hmm. Detroit being one of them. Mm-hmm. We talk about Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh because we have official agreements in those regions with regional planners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that means they've signed some type of document with us to work in concert as part of this greater study.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found in a year and a half of working alongside metropolitan planners who then went and through an RFP process and a screening process hired an economics and engineering organization to basically conduct the study. And this is like the type of organization you would hire to see if a high-speed train made sense in a certain region economically.
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
They were hired early in the 2000s, I believe. They were hired to see if it made economic sense to widen the Panama Canal. They basically determined, yes, it made sense, so they went ahead and did that. So,
okay.
This company looked at our technology. They looked at the corridor. They looked at all of the features and variables regarding ridership and not only with passengers, but with certain aspects of cargo. And they came back after an exhaustive look at this and said that this was the first time that a high-speed transportation system made economic sense in the United States.
That is just amazing. So, that seems okay. So when looking at something like that, and it's just, scintillating. It's scintillating, right? I mean, you're just talking about, just notice that even as you reference to Airbus or your relationship with NASA, and this high speed space travel is kind of like a fun little playground that you're playing in. But then to get the affirmation that this is the first time that a high speed that a high speed transportation system has ever made economical sense as presented in the United States ever. What a thrill that must be for you. What an opportunity. And that's, of course, such a unique, that's what I was sort of pointing at, is this idea of being unique and newsworthy. That's when Ben gets turned on, and that's when Ben gets to be as magical as you've been. Is that characteristic? I mean, there's not that many Hyperloops out there that are making that level of a difference.
No, as a matter of fact, that's the most comprehensive look at a system ever done, right?
Yes.
And it was very gratifying because when I started with this company back in 2014, it was really an idea. And now we've got government involvement, we've got industry involvement. It's being built. It's happening. The United States Department of Transportation just came out over the summer, basically giving Hyperloop a regulatory home within the Federal Rail Administration, which is critical. The European Commission has basically earmarked Hyperloop as an economic infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure project, because we use so little energy. The system is capable of actually producing more energy than it uses. And Europe is looking at this as a solution to, some of our post-pandemic woes, to help build our way out of this economic situation that we find ourselves in. So yeah, it's very exciting. It's absolutely one of the most exciting things I've ever been a part of.
I would hope so. Yes. Or else you would have had a life from another planet, because this is out there. This is out there as far as it goes, Ben. And it's really amazing that you're so, you're instrumental, you're intricately involved in the center of this. I mean, we call it, or I often hear the words, network of conversations, right? Like who is how things move forward. Like if I have a big idea and I keep it to myself, it just stays as an idea, of course. And if I have a big idea and I share it with a few people, then it stays as a slightly more possible idea. But when I share it with people who can actually be instrumental in carrying forth this idea and having it come to fruition, and then in this case, not only to fruition, but, top of the line, like first ever, that your level of worthwhileness and your level of gratification, and not only that, but making a difference in a way that moves the needle forward in the world at such a high level. That's just extraordinary, Ben. I mean, right?
Well, thank you. It has been great fun. And to hear people like our founder, basically say at one point that we built this entire company, or this movement, as he likes to call it, because it started off with like 100 people and now it's closer to 900 contributors to this organization around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Every deal, every milestone we've achieved has been because we've been able to really get great media coverage and stimulate the imagination of the public and get people involved and reach out to us to see how they can be a part of it. And on anything from technology partners to funding to regulatory concerns, it's all come through those channels. So, yeah, it's been fantastic. And, I don't want to take credit for any of that work. There's much smarter people who know how to levitate 40 people in a Hyperloop capsule, right?
Right.
But for me, it's like, so just to give you an example of walking through, like when we completed this study in the Great Lakes region, it fell to me to work with our marketing team to take this large technical study and sort of pull out the newsworthy bits, the most interesting things, or at least the things that we thought people would find most interesting. Turn it into a press release and help organize a press conference where we did it at the Great Lakes Science Center on the shores of Lake Erie, where all the local media was there. And so those materials, getting them disseminated to people, and when the TV cameras and the other reporters show up, making sure that they got everything that they need information-wise, their questions are getting answered, and they're being connected to the people within the relevant organizations in not only in our company, but locally, so that they can get their story completed and do so accurately. That's kind of that's where I'm hanging out, basically.
It's just unbelievable. So thank you for being that guy. I mean, wow, not only that, what a cool space. Like, I want to be you, and what a cool space. And that you're not only having such an exciting opportunity that's, for which you're getting fruit, but that it's so fun. And more than anything, it's such a massive contribution to humanity. So awesome. That's just incredible. And that's not the only thing you do, is it? You have other stuff that makes up Ben Cooke. That was just one avenue when I asked who you were, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of what I certainly do, right, during the day. So it's I'm grateful to be a part of it, and it's exciting to be involved in those things. There's a lot of different levels of publicity, and it's fun to be sort of being a part of the front of the conversation of how this project is being presented to the world. So,
cutting edge. It's beautiful. So, one question I have, and I think I sometimes I feel like this lightning rod for what my listeners might be asking too, or at least in the back of their mind. And I wonder if you can address this. This is, there's a lot of people, and maybe rightfully so, who are concerned about the direction that the media is taking now, like what we're allowed to see, or what, algorithms becoming more and more, specified and individually designed. That I get exactly what whoever they are, wants me to get, as if that's the news or that's what I'm about to be introduced to. People, like, I say I want a pair of Reeboks or something, and maybe right here with you, and my phone is off, and now later tomorrow morning, I open it up and I'm going to have a Reebok ad waiting for me.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. I'm also going to get that Reebok ad because you said it.
Exactly. Now, what I want to ask you is that with that level of media, dare I say, media manipulation, gosh, that must add a whole new dimension to how to create media coverage properly, so the right people are hearing the right things when there's a group that's either working for you or against you. To make sure that those topics land in the right spaces, in those right ears. What do you say to that?
Well, boy. So I believe you've opened a bit of a Pandora's box here.
Sorry about that.
That's correct. You know what? I love this conversation. I have it a lot, and it's a concern of mine. When I started doing this, 20 years seemed, it's not quite 20 years, but even when I first started doing it, we were still faxing press releases to news desks.
Right. Exactly. Right. And what's a fax again?
Exactly.
That's what they use. Yeah. I remember faxes. Yeah. Thanks. Oh yeah. Okay, good.
So it's interesting now because there's at once less media, especially like at the local level, right? They're like, newspapers are nowhere near what they used to be.
Right.
It used to be I would do a handful work with the LA Times, for example, on a handful of stories a year. Now, if I do one every few years, because there's so limited staff, limited real estate in what they're printing and putting out every day, that there's just not enough room. But on the other side, things, especially on internet coverage, are more so, right? It used to be you would get maybe a Forbes magazine. You look at a Forbes magazine if you had a subscription once a month. Well, Forbes.com now is churning out countless stories every single day, and in different ways. So there are opportunities that just sort of have shifted. And then to your term of, or your concern of sort of being being shown what you already like.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is just, if I were to say, and this is something that I try to practice, I don't look at those things. I don't go to Facebook for news, right?
Mm-hmm.
I typically go to Twitter and follow the journalists I'm interested in, and I keep it diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Because the internet, your phone, modern technology will keep feeding you the things that you think you like.
Mm-hmm.
And that limits discovery. It limits our ability to grow and learn beyond what we already think the world is.
Exactly.
So
it doesn't limit.
Yeah,
limit you're being very kind by using the word limit. Let's put it that way.
Well, if you want another word, that's fine. But
yeah.
I think, it's enforced these bubbles that we kind of find ourselves in.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always been sort of polarity, right? If you go back and look at the headlines from the 1780s in America, there's some pretty outlandish headlines in there, especially in the realm of politics, for example. But in media, it's just important to keep a diverse diet and go out there and find it. And especially if you're seeing a narrative of how something's being covered in the world and you want to see where things are. I mean, there's good journalism, and then there's sort of entertainment journalism, and there's a lot of entertainment journalism now.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't used to be the case either. So it's just, there's a way to be critical in how you consume media. In my opinion, this is my opinion. And then there's ways to think critically about the ways that you're consuming that very media. And I think that is the skill that's a lot lacking. I see a lot in my circles, in the loudest people on the internet. There seems to be sort of this lack of critical thinking regarding what's being put out there.
Okay, well, I think I love what you say, and I think you've also you've left a little bit of a question mark on this one. So I like these two levels. I think I do hear what you're saying. Can you rephrase it or paraphrase it again with this second level, that there's ways to be critical, and then it seemed like there's ways to be critical about how we're being critical, or something like that. Can help me out again with rephrase that with what you're pointing to that might be a...
I'll see if I can remember it, first of all.
You don't have to say the same exact thing.
Well, I reuse the word critical there, but there's a way to be critical in what we consume, right?
Right.
If you're being shown, just be mindful, first of all.
Right.
Especially on the internet, especially on your phone, that search engines and marketers and advertisers, those engines are in the business of trying to whittle you down into a specific identity. And if you want to have a broader view of what's going on in the world, you have to actively go out and find it.
Okay.
And then, even then, learn how to think critically about what you are consuming, right?
Exactly.
So
even then, this is the second level. This is what I call the second derivative of what you're saying. That's what I'm pointing to. And that's where the special skill is that you're talking about, I think. Say more about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just from my perspective in the last few years, having conversations with people, let's say on Facebook, and I use the term conversation generously.
For sure.
It's astounding to me that many people simply don't understand the difference between opinion and fact.
Mm-hmm.
And facts can generally be something that can be proven again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And an opinion is an interpretation of those facts.
Mm-hmm.
But in my sort of debates with folks with whom I disagree, and for a long time I was actively doing this, I would, foolishly perhaps, look to engage with people that I disagreed with. And it's difficult when you're unable to agree on what a fact is and what an opinion is, or sometimes just what the meanings of words are. So I think we have a long ways to go. And I think in this particular time in our lives, with social media kind of being the way it is, and at the time, we're recording this just before the 2020 election here, and there's all kinds of headlines about how social media should be handling the news. Should they be, gatekeepers to the media and to journalism? And nobody really knows the answer to that. So I think what we're seeing here is, from my perspective, this is a conversation I've been having a lot as well, and maybe you have too, Dr. Fred, is we have at our fingertips just very recently the most massive form of communication ever in humankind's history. And most of us don't know how to communicate.
Yes.
So we've got this tool that essentially nobody knows how to use properly. Right. And I think we're just going to continue to go through these sort of growing pains as we figure this out. Because you've got things that used to be sort of relegated to a few people who are at the bar with you,
right,
in terms of what you could say. And now you're going out in essentially the largest living room in the world and blurting that same thing out to everybody without any recognition that might not be acceptable.
Yeah.
And I think it's just going to take some time for us to figure that out, in my opinion.
Yeah. It really is a cluster out there, Ben. It's way a cluster on what you're talking about on that edge. And so I wonder if you would be willing to share in the second derivative conversation that you brought up, if you would be willing to share, like, let's say, okay, I'm tired of watching Twitter and Insta and Facebook and even LinkedIn for my news source. So I don't want to do that anymore, let's say. And I'm not going to use any of the other social medias either. I'm interested in getting some degree of expanded news reel source, something to help me get a view of information that wasn't designed for what it is I already like you said,
Yeah.
Where would I go? How do I do this? And then, like you said, there's more to it, not just go reading it, Middle Eastern or Russian publications of similar news features, but then what to do once I have that, even so that I can amalgamate it and have my life moving forward with some sense of what the hell's going on in the world, or what the hell I can do.
Well, I think, if you're able to figure out what the hell's going on in the world, then you're several steps ahead of me. That's what I can say. I guess in general, just to kind of speak generally about what we're talking about now, I am in communications, right? It is interesting to me, beyond press releases and media interviews. The act of communication, to me personally, I think is, first of all, poorly understood, and I think widely underappreciated. I think when you hear the phrase "we need to work on our communication," you are kind of maybe thinking of like your significant other telling you that they're not happy with something.
Right.
But to me, communication is everything. Like, it's not just words. It's not the way you and I are speaking to each other now. It's not the way your audience is listening to what we're saying. It's also what we're saying inside of our own heads. It's how we communicate internally. It's how we communicate with the people in our lives and our closest relationships. And it's how we communicate largely as a society, and what we say with our laws and our values, right? So there's I think a pretty big disconnect there. And I think it starts internally with being able to get many sides of of a conversation going, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when I'm engaged in a debate, I'm looking at several different sides of an argument. What is like the New York Times saying versus what NPR or the Associated Press is saying about a certain topic versus what might be coming out of something like Fox News or some of these other places. I typically don't go to the cable news networks, quite honestly, Fred, because I don't find they're in the ratings game. They're sort of in the entertainment
Mm-hmm.
business. They're not necessarily in the news business, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certainly data to back that up. People who primarily get their news from cable, whether it's Fox, CNN, or MSNBC or what have you,
Yeah.
are typically less informed about things than folks who have this diverse media diet.
Yes.
And it seems like a lot, but I think we owe it to ourselves if we're going to be responsible and accountable people to have that informed viewpoint. And it just speaks to diversity. In my opinion, that's what it is.
Well,
and, yeah.
yeah.
And you can still get there through a search engine, right? But you have to go out and find it. It's not going to come to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What comes to you is what is the default of what's there for algorithmically set up for what you already like.
Right, Fred. And I think if something's being shown to me, it's because some code wants me to see it.
That's interesting.
And
it's totally effing terrifying too, Ben. Let's face it.
Versus, in the olden times.
Yeah, like back before 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the newspaper could kind of get us there, right? Because they were just reporting the news, and there was a lot of it, but it was just what was happening. It wasn't for clicks. It wasn't for selling Reeboks, which, again, thank you, Fred. I'm going to be seeing these ads now for the rest of my life.
Yeah, now we got 3 ads coming a day from now on.
So I mean,
we should really talk in a week, by the way, so that we can really count the Reebok ads that show up in our feed, because we're about to get a bunch. It's funny.
But anyway, that's simply how I view it.
So, is there reliable news sources? And if there is, I mean, like, that's really a question I have now. I now have been washed down, and I feel like I'm part of the sheep in some ways. I've been washed down to sort of not believing anything that I read. Anything.
Well, and that's a problem, right? Because we need accurate information in order to navigate our world. I mean, you can go, as I often do on my harder days, I would threaten to just drop everything and go live in the woods, but I'm never going to do that. So I think it's important to be thinking critically about things. Like, is every journalist out there? There's accountable journalism. It's not perfect by any means. And they mess up. There's no doubt about that. But the best ones, I think, hold themselves accountable, right? If they get something wrong, they correct the record.
Yeah.
And, you can dig into these things and find out the truth on things. I remember, someone who was claiming that a certain bill that was being passed, for example, did all these outrageous things. And I was like, this can't be true. So what you can do is there's, at the government level, like there's public transparency. You can actually, if there is a bill up for consideration, it is going to be out there for you to read. Mm-hmm. And none of these things that people were claiming were actually in this bill, right?
So none of them were there.
And I look at the situation with, for example, this week, right? Not to date ourselves too much, because who can keep up with news these days? It seems to change on the hour. But like the New York Post, for example, right? So the situation where this story is sort of dominating headlines this week, or for the last couple of days, where a fairly large major newspaper put out this story, and there's a lot of doubt being cast upon it, and then there's criticism about the doubt being cast upon it, and what are you supposed to believe?
Yeah.
So, do I know everything? We only know as much as we can, right? We don't know. You and I can get to know each other very, very well, but we will never know the exact thoughts that are going inside of our heads, right? We can only know so much, but we can agree on certain things like what time of day it is and basic facts. And I think it'll be interesting to see, where things come out on the accountability front, because you've got these social media companies now who are, under the microscope by, certain folks in the government because of their willingness to sort of censor news that they consider to be suspect.
Yeah. That's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's a really big license to hold out there for anyone to be able to do that. This is, the First Amendment.
Well, there's a concern right now. Well, the First Amendment basically says we can say whatever the hell we want, right?
Okay.
Freedom of speech.
Yes.
Freedom of the press.
Yes.
And so, but that's just saying that the government can't censor your speech. The government can't censor the press. These other companies are not government, right?
Interesting, right? Yeah, so, my son brought that exact point to my attention. It's like, yeah.
Technically, they can do whatever they want, but now they're risking, irritating the government to the point where it's like, all right, well, if you're going to censor stories, then we're going to regulate you now.
Yeah,
and they're not going to like that either. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, clearly, though, like it seems like something needs to be done, in my opinion, to help us understand what the truth looks like again. And now, but then you're talking about censorship, right? So it's a double-edged sword. To me, it just comes down to being diverse, right?
Yeah.
Like understanding. So for me, it's like that New York Post story we've been talking about came out. I read that. And then I read several other journalists unrelated from each other about how they were looking at this. And certain ones were declaring this to be evidence, this was a huge scandal. And others were being like, well, here's why some of these things don't hold up properly. So we should probably withhold judgment. And even the people who were working at the paper allegedly distanced themselves from the publishing of this article because they weren't comfortable with aspects of it. So it's interesting.
How does that? So how? This is a new wrinkle in your job as a what did you call it? A media. What was it?
Media relations publicist.
Now, publicist is the old school one before 2018. Now you're this media relations guy.
Yeah.
And these are some serious kaleidoscopic hurdles for you to at least consider when you pursue how to get the right information to the right people to move any kind of program that's worth moving forward.
Well, and that comes down to credibility and accountability on my part as a publicist, right? So I will work with organizations to make sure that when we are approaching the media, we can answer all the questions. We're not putting out anything that we can't back up or we cannot answer in some fashion. We're not putting out hyperbole. We're not putting out, and that's where I like to work, right? I like to work in the place of creating a solid story about things that are making an impact. And when I approach journalists, I try to approach it from a journalist perspective. Like if you're a trained journalist, you need to answer certain questions. You need to be able to back things up. You need to check sources, right? You need to be able to go to other organizations and build a credible story that makes sense. And it doesn't always work out for me, right? Like, for example, in a Hyperloop story, what will often happen is there's obviously a group of very smart people, PhD level people building this thing who understand the science and the engineering behind it. And a lot of times what journalists will love to do is go speak to an expert at a university who has no involvement in the project whatsoever, who has all kinds of questions that they can't answer, which then throws doubt on the story that I'm providing, right?
Exactly.
But they have, they're doing that to round it out, right? But to me, it's like you're including somebody who has absolutely no involvement in the project. Of course, they're not going to understand it properly. So
yes,
it's I understand that why they need to do that. It's a tradition that they do, but it's hurt us in the past. And I will reply to these. I'm like, if you had these questions, you could have asked us and we would be happy to answer them. But they need that round perspective, right?
Well, I think we're seeing, Ben, that the whole idea of Hyperloop, it's amazing that it's gotten to the space where every country is not only acknowledging it, but, appreciating it, writing about it, recognizing it, exploring it, designing it, supporting it and all that, because you're now left at a space where just to get a story across the street accurately has become really complex. And, multiple news sources, and wash out the news sources to be critical of our own critical thinking, and make sure you get diverse reports of everything that you thought was true, so that you can know that the other truth, which is opposite of yours, is also worth considering. And,
you might have to repeat that a few more times for me to follow, Fred.
Really what we have is it gets worn down, is my point. I mean,
it's exhausting. I think a lot of people are exhausted.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's been a very difficult time. The public relations industry, has been fairly devastated by the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because it's just in the news since March has basically been COVID-19, the election, civil unrest. I think I'm pretty fortunate in my career. I don't have to deal with a lot of politics, right? So we do on the regulation side, but we keep it about, with Hyperloop in particular, we keep it about the technology, the opportunity, and it's I don't know if I could operate very well, for example, as a press secretary for a senator or something along those lines. I think it would get pretty nuts.
So we're going to start, I think it's time to start winding down, and we should have another conversation soon. And so, first of all, I want to ask you a question. Does the name Winston Smith do you know who that is?
Winston Smith.
So Winston Smith is the key character in Orwell's 1984. And so that's Winston. That's my guy, Winston. And he had a job that was kind of like your job, 40 years, hopefully up, many years from now. And his job was basically to alter the news, whenever necessary. Actually, Go back and retroactively alter the news,
right?
So they can meet the party's needs. And that book, I don't know about you, but I honestly, I'm pretty fearless in most situations, and I can't even get through the third section of that thing, because I just I don't even want to know what's coming next with this character, And anyways, so we're in funny times, and it's of course, funny isn't exactly the right word. We're in challenging times, but it is now, and his life is what it is, and it's people like you who are continuing to be so committed to making a difference, to dealing with the truth, to putting the right people together with the right influencers or the right companies to move needles forward, to be there after the gold, after the rush, after the gold rush. And
I think there's plenty to be hopeful about.
Of course,
I think, as challenging as it can be, there's still things to look forward to.
For sure.
There are, amazing opportunities along with challenges that we're going to be presented with that, hopefully we can work together to solve. And I'm grateful to be a part of a organization like Hyperloop, because I do feel like I'm a part of a solution, right?
Thank you.
And regardless of what the media is talking about, which tends to be primarily fear-based. I had early in my career, I was working with a gentleman who previously he was the news director over at ABC News. And he was very much like, look, the house that's burning down is going to end up on the news, not the little boy who's helping the old lady cross the street.
Right. And
unfortunately, that's what people tune into. They tune in to see the car wreck. They don't tune in to see the happiness, so to speak. And we have to do our best to resist those urges. Like I do it, but there's most of us, unfortunately, I think, are stuck in searching for that next car wreck.
Thank you. And, Ben, I have to ask you, representing my listeners, if someone wants to get to know Ben Cooke or follow Ben Cooke or be like Ben Cooke or read what Ben Cooke reads, or how can someone keep in touch with you or follow you? Where's your best space if the listeners are curious about learning more about you?
Well, that's a great question. I don't post a lot, but I'm on Twitter at Ben T Cooke, and that's COOK with an E. I'm usually pretty available on my website, which is bencooke.net. And I try to keep things about the work that I'm doing and sharing things that I think are interesting or helpful. And not so much about pointing fingers or passing judgment, though I'm not perfect in that department either.
Yeah. Welcome. That's why we call this place Welcome to Humanity, Ben.
It's a great title.
Thank you. All right. Well, okay, listeners, how awesome was that? So it's really, really great for being with you, Ben. Thank you so much for sharing from your heart. Thank you for taking on some difficult topics with me and bouncing them around like we said we would organically. So I truly appreciate you being here. Entirely grateful to meet you and dig in with you today. Really get both the challenging and the wondrous times, miraculous times that we're living in, and with a commitment to contributing and staying afloat and staying upright and staying intentional. There really is a lot to be hopeful, and there's a lot of promising, like you said, there's never been anywhere near the capacity to communicate that's actually out here as tools underutilized as there is right now. It's just a phenomenal space of time. So
yeah, and hopefully as time goes on, we'll just get better at it.
Absolutely. All right, Ben. Well, I'm going to bid you farewell. It's been a pleasure, and we'll talk soon. And listeners, thanks for staying with us, and thanks for joining us for just another terrific Welcome to Humanity episode. It's just been wonderful to be with you. Rock on, and we'll see you on the next time. Bye for now, and bye, Ben. Talk to you next time.
Thanks, Dr. Fred. It was great. Grateful to be on.
Wasn't that just incredible? Ben Cooke, he calls himself a publicist or a media specialist, but what he really is, an extraordinarily unique person who's out to change the world in big ways and has succeeded in bigger ways and continues to just rock the world through really being on the front edge of information delivery and putting people together to make a difference in areas of life that really matter. And for that, gosh, I really respect him. And he's so much fun to talk to. He's funny, he's smart, he's innovative, just beautiful. Loved it. Maybe when you were listening, you thought of a person or two or three or your family or friends who could really benefit from this episode. And go ahead and reach out to them now and invite them to listen. Invite them to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And go ahead and subscribe yourself, because it really does make a difference in terms of impact. That way you'll be able to get all the new episodes as they become available. And if you really appreciate what we do here, and I know you do, just take a few minutes and leave a positive review. It makes a huge difference. So I'd be truly grateful for your support. Also, to catch up on any of the past episodes, head on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. And until next time, well, this is Dr. Fred, and this has been an amazing edition of Welcome to Humanity podcast. Thank you for listening, and have a beautiful day.